Hello, I'm James Warren.
And I'm Andy Cushen.
And this is the Denver Urbanism Podcast, a podcast on all things city building
in the mixed up, crazy city of Denver.
Okay, Andy. Well, thank you for finishing out the intro for me. That's a burden that I'm grateful I no longer have to carry on my own.
Well, it shouldn't just be one responsibility of you sitting in that chair to do a certain task and me to have a different responsibility sitting in this chair with a different task. We should share those tasks, and in that way both of us get to enjoy certain things without leaving the comfort of our own chairs.
Right. Yes, you are able to do things that you're great at. I benefit from that. I do things that I'm great at and you benefit from that. And if we mix and match like that, we're all better off. Anyway, let's talk about a completely unrelated topic.
Unrelated, mixed use. Okay, land use, we've been talking about this. I think a prerequisite to this episode, dear listener, if you want to go deep and nerdy with us as we're going to go in this episode, please do listen to the Eras Tour with Ken Tropel. That was a fantastic episode, and it is inextricable what we're going to talk about here today, mixed use from urban form and the sort of way urbanity works.
And we're going to let you go listen to that right now. We're going to pause. Okay, welcome back. So now that you've listened to that, you have a little bit of a context for how cities existed historically and some of the changes that have taken place over time to deliver us into this modern era that we are in, on the verge of the sustainable city, but still recovering from some of the mistakes that were made in the 60s and 70s primarily that changed how our cities are built.
And on the verge of this sustainable city era, or whatever you want to call it, I think one of the sort of new precepts that everyone's talking about and that people understand is the importance of mixed use when it comes to land use, right? So we're just going to unpack that for a second here. So land use, you can make all these decisions at the higher level of what should go, in this parcel of land. Mixed use essentially just says, well, it could be several things at once.
Right.
Rather than saying, okay, that's purely commercial, this is purely office, this is purely residential, you can actually have multiple things concurrently happening either in the same parcel, which is then separate buildings, or within the same building.
And I think that most people in a vacuum would, without even understanding what the term mixed use means, identify mixed use as a very valuable thing in their community, right? If you were to ask somebody what they value in choosing where to live, they would say, well, of course, the affordability, but I also want a space that is large enough for me and my family, whatever large enough means to them and whatever family means to them. And I want to be able to do things without having to drive all across town, right? I'd like to live close to my work, or I'd like my children to be able to walk to school or to be able to engage with their parents in the neighborhood. Maybe I want to visit my parents, and I want to be able to experience restaurants and fun things to do in the afternoon with my family, with my loved ones. And all of that you would be describing there is simply mixed use.
And so there's kind of two ways that can look. So if you're in Congress Park and you're thinking like, well, I live in a great neighborhood, and you do, you absolutely do. Congress Park's very nice, where along 12th Avenue you have homes and multifamily homes and maybe a school and then, the little pockets of businesses. I would say, for the purposes of this episode, that's kind of horizontal mixed use.
Right.
Within the neighborhood, there are a variety of nodes and sort of opportunities in closer proximity and sort of walkable distance or bikeable distance that you can kind of get your needs met. You go down to 6th Avenue, there's something down there. You go to 12th, there's something there. You go to Madison, there's something there. That sort of horizontal mixed use can also be kind of misconstrued. So I'll give you one. There was a bunch of press recently about, it could have been 140 acres or something, 150 acres out by the airport, that there was a big press release about this new part of town is being built out and it's going to be mixed use. Okay, it's going to have a Target, right, and maybe 2 or 3 drive-through restaurants along the Strode. So across 150 acres,
right,
I wouldn't go so far as to say that one little corner of that 150 acre sort of big site being commercial is fair to call mixed use.
Right.
And yet we can still understand the importance of not having a 100% exclusive, this is industrial only and nothing else
Right.
kind of neighborhood. Because for the folks who live in Congress Park, or the folks who live in West Colfax, or the folks who live, in other walkable parts of Arvada or something like that, you intuitively understand, it's valuable to me to live close to the grocery store so I could just kind of walk there, or even a short drive, right? The folks who do drive, the drives are shorter. This is one of many advantages of mixed use, right? When you have multiple uses close to each other, I'm not going to yet say on top or next to. When they're close to each other, the trips are shorter. You would do certain things with more efficiency because you can walk down to the Ace Hardware on 12th Avenue and then go to Zorba's for something to eat and then walk to your friend's house and then walk back home. When you have more options, be they uses or units in a given area, it makes those sort of trips in that area more efficient because you can cross those things out at once.
Yeah, and I think that to your point here, there are a number of ways to do mixed use. You can obviously have a ground floor retail building and then a few floors of offices above that and then many stories of residential above that. And there are places where you can point to examples of that. But in other contexts, it's a restaurant on a ground floor and a floor or two of residential above that. And frankly, that was probably most of the way we saw this mixed use play out historically, is that a family lived above the restaurant that they operated or the business that they operated.
I watched Howl's Moving Castle last night.
Yeah.
It's my favorite Studio Ghibli movie. My husband was so mystified by the movie. He didn't get it in a lot of ways.
Movie.
But that movie definitely has a lot to do with mixed use. Howl operates two different shops out of his home through the power of magic. And then, the main character, she lives above the hat shop that was her family's hat shop. And so it's just sort of intuitive that there should be, or in many ways there have always been a relationship between business owners and their homes.
Yeah. Point is that there are a lot of ways you can mix uses together that don't require high rises, that can integrate different types of uses together to accommodate different people's living styles and family choices in the tapestry of the urban fabric. But today, unless you live in a select neighborhood in Denver or some other city, you probably are not the beneficiary of this. Chances are, if you live in Denver, you live in a place where uses are very segregated from one another. You've got restaurants over there, offices over there, and homes over here. So what happened?
So, a couple things happened. I would peg one of the big differences here as the difference between the pedestrian and the transit city to the automobile city, right? Mm-hmm. In the inverse sense, when I mention, mixed use makes trips shorter, the automobile makes long trips faster and easier. And so there's sort of a kind of consequence of that thinking when it comes to building out Bear Valley or, a neighborhood like that. It's easy then to just plop down home, all with garages, all up and down the street, every street all the way to Federal Boulevard, and have Federal remain the sort of commercial corridor with no housing on it and that section of Federal. And it's easy to do that because you've already built this thinking that everybody's going to own a car, knowing, frankly, that everybody is going to own a car and sort of planning on that. There's sort of an exclusivity in building an environment like that sort of requires a car to get around, right? You have to be a certain level of affluence to do that. That would be kind of one way that this goes. But I would say the other way that it sort of has happened is the Euclidean zoning sort of infrastructure and the way that we had zoning for so long. Until 2010, most mixed use sort of existing structures in Denver were just sort of old stuff that we allowed to stay. We didn't have a mixed use zone district. Downtown, you could sort of do certain mixed use in downtown Denver prior to 2010 and the sort of new zoning code. But it was a big deal. It was a big win, for urbanists that MX, this sort of mixed use zoning district, would be created in 2010. And so think about from 1920 to 2010, that's 90 years of the build out of many, many, many hundreds of acres of sort of urban area, all under the kind of influence of we'll just paint with a brush on a map. R1 is here. R2 is the teeniest little sort of sliver. And then we have all this kind of like B and C kind of for commercial and office and sort of job centers. And it's really easy to kind of paint that way when what you're thinking about is cars. It's harder to realize the kind of harms then that exercises and the kind of entrapment almost that exercises on then the residents of that new neighborhood that you've created.
And I will say that when they made these zoning decisions back in the day, there were probably some, well-meaning reasons for doing some of this stuff. For instance, if they eliminated zoning tomorrow and somebody opened an oil refinery next to my home, I don't think that would be a good thing for the neighborhood and you can call me a NIMBY, but I don't super want the oil refinery next door. I don't super want a slaughterhouse opening next door. There are all kinds of things where you say, okay, actually maybe it does make sense to add a little bit of distance between people and some of these uses. But it's easy to imagine how that goes too far quite quickly. And suddenly you say, you actually can't have a restaurant in your neighborhood. And now we've gone from protecting people's well-being and the actual air that they breathe to now people can't go to a local restaurant, and an entrepreneur who might otherwise open a restaurant in their neighborhood is unable to do that, all because of some highlighters on a map. And so, to your point, we exist in that historical context that had maybe gone too far, and we are now in a new era where we're starting to rethink those things.
There's also the kind of harm that has been the marginalization of people who still do run businesses in their home, right? Like, it's not hard to kind of clock this. If you're on Google Maps, you can see sometimes like, oh, like so-and-so cleaning company, and it's sort of tagged for like a random house in the middle of otherwise a residential neighborhood. There's also, I had friends who their sort of older son was in like a play group, right? Play group was a bunch of other sort of families in the neighborhood who then all pooled their money, and sort of one of the moms then was sort of getting paid under the table in order to watch the kids. And like, we're talking about like 5 kids or something like that, right? That type of need for close by services and that type of need for people to do work in their house or to sort of perform work cheaply for others, like that are living close to them, that hasn't gone away. We're still humans. We still have legs. We still have toddlers have very short legs. There's only so far that they can
what's
go.
Your source on that?
Yeah, well, you can look that one up. That's a Googleable one. And so I think that the kind of backdoor commercial, which has been going on for many years in a lot of our neighborhoods, is also sort of inhibited. It takes money out of the sort of legal sort of system and puts it into this kind of under the table system that is all basically just because of this segregation of uses. If it became permissible, so I used to live with my hair cutter, right? My friend. And during the pandemic, I would go to her place and she would just cut my hair. I think she did that for a lot of people, right? That is like literally not legal. You would not be able to operate a business like that. But because I sort of know my friend, it was not a big deal to kind of pay that friend and have other people kind of come and go in that way. We're just living in a Looney Tunes land where we think that like no business will happen at all in these kind of segregated uses. And we're really just kind of burying people for no reason when they are doing otherwise pretty productive, useful things that people are asking them to do.
I don't super want somebody performing surgery in their front room, right? There are examples you can point to and say, well, that probably shouldn't be done in a home. That needs to be done in a more regulated environment. Great. Fine. I love that. But now people can't get childcare when there's somebody who would be absolutely willing to do some childcare for a little bit of cash. And that harms everybody. It makes childcare more exclusive and elusive in our city. It drives up the cost of that childcare in this example. And so too with getting your hair cut. It makes it harder for you to get a haircut because you have to go to a place to get a haircut that might be farther. You might not know the person who's going to cut your hair. You're less sure of the quality, and you probably will have to pay more. And so we looked at an interesting article out of the New York Times called Meet the New Home Kitchen Business. Why don't you talk about sort of what is happening out in Los Angeles?
So as you mentioned, you don't want people doing surgery, at home, right? You don't have the facilities for that. There's like a level of sort of disinfection that like needs to happen. Yeah. But we all cook. And so it's pretty natural, especially amongst like immigrant communities or second generation, immigrant communities, that when you're cooking something, you know, you want to sell that. That might have been like pretty common in the country that you came from, that you could operate a business out of your home or sort of out of the kind of little stall built in front of your home. And so in California, in 2019, this program called the Micro Enterprise Home Kitchen Operation was sort of legalized. It required counties themselves to adopt rules, but it actually is like kind of adjacent to zoning. I assume this is a zoning question, not addressed in the article, and I could look it up, but it's really about health departments, right? If, James, you are a fantastic vegan cook, if you want, like, if 5 of your neighbors on the street, like, want to buy that cooking from you, and you say, like, okay, great, like, pick it up at this time every day, again, that's basically existent. Like, there's already people that are living that way. There really is. Like, it's not uncommon at all. But then in the California example, they said, let's take that out of the sort of like darkness and say, we're going to give you a license for this. You can actually run a sort of commercial kitchen out of your home. And you can either do that as takeout only, and then they had sort of specific restrictions on that, which were kind of funny to read about in the article. I'm not saying that this is the gold standard of what we should do in Colorado, but it's just interesting. Or you can do like a back patio of your house that you can have like small dining there. And there are great examples within the article about sort of success stories and challenges that still sort of exist, you know, in that article. This type of program really just opens your mind to the fact that, like, again, a lot of this was happening. And so making this legal is really only kind of bringing the stuff that was happening into the light. And in the case of like somebody who owns their home and, you know, wants to do something productive with their kitchen, you know, rather than just feed you and your partner or you and your kids or you're just yourself, like, what if you like really enjoy cooking and don't have the money to open a restaurant or anything like that? You still have a productive capacity and you still have neighbors and you still might have customers. And so this, I think Mihawk is how I would sort of pronounce the acronym for this program. But this Mihawk program is so interesting, just as sort of a little example of like how you can bring a mixing of uses back. And that's not even really a zoning question, right? A couple other instances of this. So in Denver, we have something that I think is like somewhat unique. There's some uses in other cities, but we have a use overlay that was also sort of new in the 2010 zoning code, these sort of use overlays. Again, they were sort of bringing in uses that existed before, but use overlay, we have this historic structure use overlay. And that means that like if you're like in a big historic home, you can operate like an Airbnb just a regular B&B in that home. Anybody can operate an Airbnb in their home if they get licensed these days. Yet another example of some amount of mixing, right, of uses. You can also operate an office in there or like an art studio. Or some kind of studio in there. There's another example that I really like. You'll sort of see people post about this or post about this, like kind of online, accessory commercial units. You familiar with this concept? So accessory commercial units, I think, are like kind of a loved concept. We actually don't have like a million examples of that in Denver. I would say like the sort of store underneath with the homes above is kind of more common than the sort of kind of front porch, which has been enclosed and turned into a restaurant in someone's house. Although, you know, I'm saying that. The listener is probably thinking, I know of one.
That's what you sound like, listener.
Yeah. No. Sorry. I know of one. Yes, this is how you sound. You're so wise. But in other cities and in certain states, like that kind of the question of what if you just like enclose the front portion of your house so that way you can operate a taekwondo class in there or a hair salon or something like that. In the city of Raleigh in 2022, they legalized accessory commercial units. Uniquely under sort of North Carolina law, cities don't have the ability to regulate alcohol and tobacco sales, so they just kind of like left restaurants out of that. I think we all understand that like a coffee shop or some sort of restaurant is like also a very natural extension of what this kind of front addition on your house could be for an accessory commercial unit. But there are a lot of policy innovations that are happening that are not the same as let's take an area, demolish what's there, and build up a new sort of 5-story building that has 2 shops underneath it. The mixed use zoning exists in a lot of parts of Denver, but at this point, I think we need to kind of think more critically about what is the productive capacity and what are the actual activities that people are doing in their homes? Yeah. And how can we kind of bring that from the kind of gray economy into like the real economy?
And maybe even just thinking about those as 2 different strategies, right? Because we have the infrastructure, the buildings that for so long were forced to be just residential for, you know, like you said, 90 years. That's going to take time, even if you reclassified a lot of these parcels as mixed use and slightly increase their density or whatever. It just isn't going to happen tomorrow. It might not happen in 10 years or 20 years. These things take a lot of time. And so in the interim, how do we make space for all of, like you said, these things that are operating in the shadows to come to light, to maybe have a little bit more oversight and, frankly, for the city to generate some tax revenue from them?
Yeah, I think, again, I mentioned Airbnb because I had to slip the tongue, but Airbnb is sort of an interesting example of this. I personally, I'm just going to go on the record here, I hate Airbnb. This is sort of my opinion. Unique. I know no one else has this opinion. No one else at the table here hates Airbnb. The reason I hate Airbnb is because, like, it's just kind of like, it's weird. You know, we have so many fees and like additional taxes on lodging in the city, and we make certain decisions about hotels. And I think Airbnb, in a proactive way, has shown us that there is a lot more demand for sort of areas to lodge that are outside of the sort of commercial core where most of the hotels are. But like, when Airbnb is used weirdly, it's like, I don't know, maybe you should just assess your home at a commercial rate. You know, like if you're like using Airbnb constantly, even if you live in that home, it just seems like it's just, I think, conceptually kind of silly. And there was even like an effort last year, I think, to tackle this at the state legislature, and everybody like yelled them down. But it really is a question of tax in that way. Like, there are taxes that lodgers are sort of supposed to pay if they go in the right way. Airbnb, we now have a structure for Airbnb. We do regulate Airbnbs in the city, but like that structure then kind of is meant to capture essentially some tax and some kind of revenue for the city, instead of just letting people use this kind of app to like shadowy rent out, you know, a downstairs bedroom.
It's probably worth an entire episode on its own.
It is. I'm going too deep into it. Yeah.
But I think that Airbnb, right, probably the way that humans originally did additional lodging for visitors to their town is somebody shows up and you say, hey, throw me a few coin and you can sleep in my living room or in my spare room. And eventually that person maybe decides to open up an inn or something like that. Like, these, all of the types of businesses that existed throughout history probably just started in people's homes, restaurants, and frankly, surgeons, like back in the day. That's probably how they first began. And we're talking about creating more space for that. I am interested. Let's say you are the mayor of a, I don't know, city in the Mountain West that is really trying to revitalize downtown. Do you want a lot of businesses being opened in the surrounding neighborhoods? Or does that pose a threat to the uses that are downtown that might bring people downtown because they can't get that in their neighborhood?
Now, there will always be specialization, right? Like, we used to have a lot of watch stores downtown. There used to be, you could go get your watch repaired. You can go get your shoe repaired and stuff like that.
I've done my watch repair downtown.
There it is. And those uses kind of exist because like one or two special people want to be in the place where most people go. I don't think downtown is going to stop being a place where lots of people go and thus is conducive to specialized uses. But we don't think that like all of the grocery stores in the city should be downtown.
Right.
Like, that's like just an absolutely stupid example, right? We don't think that like all of the jobs in the city should be downtown. It is home for a disproportionate number of the jobs. And again, a disproportionate number of the hotels and, you know, many, 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 many of the hotels. If we get it into our minds that the only way to sort of like make downtown better is to say like, you can't build new hotels in other places, so everybody has to stay downtown. Like that's a zero sum kind of way of thinking. Denver historically has been a growing city, and there has been room for what you once called the downtown of the suburbs, which is Cherry Creek, to sort of like exist and start to kind of thrive in a way that is like separate from the way that we kind of considered downtown to be thriving in 2019. I'd say downtown is another example of not enough mixed use.
Yeah.
Which maybe just seems crazy, but like, if we have 70% of the total square footage in downtown as office, that's not mixed use.
Right.
That's an office district with like token other things.
Right.
And so part of then the kind of desire to really kind of emphasize mixed use is not just looking at all residential neighborhoods and saying, well, there's something wrong here. It's like, in every context, if you just try and say, this space over here is only for offices, and then this space 10 miles away is only for homes. Like, you're just kind of lying to yourself and setting something up for failure as soon as people don't want to drive every single day. And we have the internet and you can call each other from your separate homes and continue to do business.
And I would also say to the downtown argument, let's say that I am a cookie baker. I think I've got a great recipe. I open up my little cookie baking shop out of my home here. And holy cow, as it turns out, my neighbors, people in the neighborhood love it too. There's lines out the door. I think to myself, maybe I could bring this downtown. Maybe I could make this into something that is operating at a bigger scale and I could get a lot of foot traffic. Like, there's an incubation element here that is really, really accessible for folks just by allowing businesses to start by dipping their toes in the water in their own home.
I agree. I think what you're saying there is really important. Again, there will always be a use case in the American downtown. We have this sort of historic fabric of downtown, this like disproportionate office share of downtown, disproportionate hotel. We got the convention center, we got all the sports facilities downtown. There's a million things that you can't really get aside from going downtown. And so then if you are, I'll give you an example. Levin Deli. Love Levin Deli, right? They are just around the corner from the museum where I work. And so Levin Deli now has sort of several new locations. They have a new location that just opened by, Washington Park.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's called Levin Supply. Like, I think originally they mostly wanted it to be like, oh, come in and buy your pesto and stuff like that. But people love their sandwiches. And so
Levin's great.
They just continue to cook.
Good vegan options.
There's also going to be like a new one in one of the downtown skyscrapers. We understand that's kind of normal for downtown skyscrapers to have like a restaurant or so, a coffee shop there. But let me give you a different thing though. So that little place where Levin exists now on 12th Avenue, that actually used to be like an auto body shop that was just renovated, and now has some like architecture offices and stuff like that in that space. And then Levin is there on the corner. Levin kind of outgrew the kind of kitchen situation that they had there, and so now they cook all of their bread still. They like do all of their own sauces, but they actually do it offsite. They're like up in, I think, Elyria, Swansea. They have like a facility where they like cook all their bread there and then bring the bread in. So specialization will always have a use. You like learn how many customers and what kind of customers you can suit by kind of being in the right place. I don't think Levin could have taken off if it hadn't been in that kind of cultural center as part of downtown. I think Levin really became and succeeds in the way that it is because of how downtown it is. The point I want to make about this is that what is successful for you as an entrepreneur is not the same as what is successful for the historic way that we have permitted businesses as a city. And we need to kind of constantly be looking for ways to grow, and grow in productive, non-extractive ways. Like, you already have a kitchen at your house. It's fine if you want to cook and your neighbors want to pay you for it. I just think you read an article about that Mihawk thing and it just feels so logical.
Right. Yeah, mixed use benefits the neighbors because I want to go buy local food in my neighborhood. It benefits people who want to earn money that way and express themselves through cooking. And it benefits this overall fabric because, you never know when the next home chef is going to build a brick and mortar place. And ideally, there's some residential units over that as well as neighborhoods progress. So this is in some ways low-hanging fruit for the city to supercharge what it means to have a vibrant community tomorrow. Because we talk so much about how we can rezone and how we can do overlays and different things that are just going to take a long time. This is something that would have an effect tomorrow if you allowed it.
I think as well, the last part of this I'll shout out is we talked about this as like part of the evolution of the sustainable city. In a recent report, I think in 2023 from, Rocky Mountain Institute, which is a nonprofit that studies, energy efficiency and sustainability, right? They estimated that if all of the kind of metro area of Denver essentially just adopted in their commercial areas mixed use zones and then was sort of allowed to grow with those mixed use zones kind of producing new mixed use buildings, which is that kind of slow version we just discussed. You would be talking about a baseline 14% cut to vehicle miles traveled over a sort of 20-year horizon here. Wow. So it's been studied, it's been shown, it's like not that mysterious if we have the ability to integrate several uses into sort of one site or one neighborhood. Like we are actually just making neighborhoods that we want to walk in and bike in and drive less or drive not at all in. It's just not that mysterious, and it would be the next step, I think, to kind of keep the momentum going towards that sustainable neighborhood.
Okay, so we've extolled the benefits here of mixed use. I think probably listeners are already on board. If they weren't before, hopefully they are convinced now. Where can people plug in? What can they be paying attention to on the horizon that might continue to shape how we think about mixed use in the city and in the state?
Well, a couple different ways that they can get involved. I think an underrated, potentially quote unquote mixed use sort of coded bill that is going through the legislature right now is this Yes in God's Backyard bill. Because it's actually not just churches. It's Yes in God's Backyard is sort of the branding here, but it also involves schools. And we haven't really talked about mixed use is not just homes, restaurants, and offices. Mixed use is also like there's public spaces as well, right? In other cities, and actually in Denver, we are going to build pretty soon up on like Washington Street in Globeville, a library on the first floor with homes above. Yeah. Right? Like that kind of mixing of civic and sort of private uses is also a mixed use that is sort of important. And so if we were going to allow schools to develop housing on their land or something like that, I think that that's really valuable and it's a great idea that would allow some of that mixing of uses. Again, we understand schools are important. Even in like the worst kind of suburban sprawl experience, like there's definitely a school fairly proximate to the residential neighborhood that might not have any other businesses or anything in it. So I don't know actually off the top of my head if that YIGBY thing then allows like those residences developed to have a mixed use component to it. That would be cool. But there is, I think, a small mixing there. We do need to just push more on this, though. I think this is like the next level. That the governor talks about wanting to add homes where jobs are. I think the kind of inverse of that is also valuable, and it's not something that we're like trying to do to change everybody's neighborhood in the worst way, but it's like add some like legitimate jobs instead of just gray jobs where homes are. It wouldn't take too many reforms to see actually just a small but steady churn of new businesses in someone's home. I'm sure that my friend the haircutter wishes she could run, her business out of her home. I don't actually think that that's legal at all in Denver. I don't think we have a way of making that legal. That might take actually like a state bill.
Yeah. Well, one last thing I wanted to shout out is the organization Strong Denver. They do a lot of advocacy about kind of the importance of both density but also mixed uses. They take it from an interesting perspective where it's more about kind of like the tax base and the sustainability of a city financially, and how by allowing these things we can actually have a very financially stable and strong Denver. Plug in with them. I actually don't personally know. I admire their organization, but I don't know anyone who works with that organization. Dear listener, if you do know somebody, please connect them with us. We'd love to connect. You can leave a comment on the podcast, and we'd love to connect. But they're a great organization. They're doing some cool stuff. You should go check out their website as well. They're part of the Strong Towns movement.
The accessory commercial unit thing, I think it was really promulgated in a lot of ways by them. So like that is, these ideas have been percolating for several years now. I mean, we just need to take some action.
Well, Andy, I really appreciate you sitting down with me and talking about mixed uses. And hopefully in the next few years here, we can see more of this type of thing benefit our city and bring us closer to the city that we know we can be.
The Denver Urbanism Podcast is a production of longtime blog Denver Infill and sister blog Denver Urbanism. You're welcome to get more engaged at denverurbanism.com. Thanks very much for listening.
Can't talk about Bob's Burgers without getting all flustered.